Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host, Greg Thompson, and tonight I am joined by a different, still handsome, still bald, but different partner in crime, Sal Capaccio. How are we doing, Sal?
I'm pretty good, man. Thanks for asking me to be on here with you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Aaron's taking his vacation up north to Maine, so figured it's getting into the meat of training camp here. So who better to ask than everyone knows you from WGR, from your Sports and Stuff podcast, from the behind the scenes at training camp show that you're doing. It's really fun to have football back. I know sometimes those dog days of it really get rough. Off the top here, what have your impressions been is kind of getting back to a little bit more normal camp? You guys had some access last year, but is it feeling a little bit more normal for someone who's done it, as often as you have?
Yeah, and first of all, I think Aaron and I do kind of look alike, actually.
It's not that far off.
That's right, to be honest with you. And just from a personal perspective, it's like going from 0 to 120 at the snap of a finger, right? I mean, because it's like I'm in Oregon and vacation and hey, training camp's not for a couple of weeks. And like the minute it starts, just boom, got to write practice reports, got to do behind the scenes Facebook Live, get shows like this, podcasts, whatever it is. It's pretty crazy, but it's all good. I like it. I'm not complaining. It's great. I love it like this. And it is different than last year. It's a lot better than last year. Obviously, we do have more access. There's more media there. We all have to go through the vaccination thing, and who is and who isn't. And if you want to be involved with interviews with players and that kind of thing, but aside from that and all the things that go into that and the hoops that you have to kind of go through and jump through, just being on the field, watching football practice is really good. And we were able to do that last year, but we have a little bit more of an area we can roam, which is really nice. We're not like right up and close and personal, like maybe we would be at Fisher all around the track. But it's really good to be back to watching football for sure.
No, that's awesome. And it is fun to have a little sense of normalcy. I was able to go down on Saturday and obviously having 15,000 people or whatever it was there and feeling a little bit more like normal is certainly welcome. So we'll see how the rest of that goes. Obviously, there's a lot of news about different protocols and how teams are handling that, some of the percentages of things. But, I think we've seen that hasn't been the distraction that maybe some Bills fans thought it would coming into the season. It's really been focused on football, and that's been refreshing for folks like us who, over at Cover One, we try to focus on the football side of it, and it's been refreshing that's been the focus through the actual practices and training camps.
Yeah, we could have an hour or two discussion really on, the fact that this is part of our lives that we have to report on this, and people hate that, and I get it. Like, I'll be the first to tell you, Greg, like, I hate that part of the job this year. I hate the fact that I have to report on vaccination statuses and percentages for teams. And then you get a large percentage of people on social media that complain to you about it, that why just stick to football. Well, here's my news to them. That is football. It actually matters this year because you're talking about things that could literally impact the outcome of games because of how teams have to operate. I wish it weren't the case. Yeah. I wish I could never have to talk about it. I totally get it. I don't feel comfortable talking about it with players or coaches or anything like that. I'm just like you. I want to stick to football. I want to talk about football. But that's not the job. The job is to cover everything that encompasses the NFL. And right now, this is a big thing that encompasses the NFL.
Yeah, go ask a Vikings fan right now. They lost their entire quarterback room all at once. The Dolphins lost their entire tight end room. And Mike Zimmer's comments on it make sense that, this isn't some abstract theoretical situation. What if that happens to us on the Friday of a game week and all of a sudden, you're in a Kendall Hinton situation and you're starting a wide receiver who was a college, option quarterback in the NFL? That's a real scenario that the teams are preparing for.
Yeah, no doubt. And that's why it's important. And look, they don't have to answer, but you have to ask, I think, and you have to find out, what's going on with your team because fans want to know what their situation is. I saw Tom Pelissero tweet that 90% of NFL players have had at least one shot. That's a really good number for the league. But, some teams are still in a much different situation than other teams, as you just pointed out.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. So to the football itself with the Bills here, it's been I think an overall positive standpoint. There's been a couple injuries here and there, and we'll talk about some of those coming up here. But there's certainly been a fair amount of standouts. With the access you've had, and now getting at least one practice in pads. What are some of the names that have stood out to you that have really separated themselves and noticing in the reps that you see?
Well, I think Jake Kumaro is one of those guys high on the list. The wide receiver. He has, every year it seems like there's a receiver, right? That Duke Williams and Stills, and you remember when Des Lewis, until the pads came on, a couple of years in a row, Des Lewis,
Rick Rogers,
right? There's always a guy, and I want to be careful of stopping short. Like, I don't think that's who Jake Kumaro is. Jake Kumaro's been in this league, and he had a high praise from Aaron Rodgers, as we know that entire story coming from Green Bay. Yeah. The Bills liked him a lot last year. They claimed him, and let's remember the Bills had Robert Foster and decided we don't need him and had Jake Kumaro. Like, that's kind of the decision they made last year around that time when Camp Cuts came around. And then they lost him because they were trying to create a roster spot for John Brown. They didn't mean to lose him. New Orleans picked him up. They got him back. I really like what Jake Kumaro brings. People will talk about his special teams ability. He's going to make this team, but not because of special teams. He's going to make it because he can play wide receiver. And the added bonus is he can play on all the special teams, which is really good. So I think that's one of them. And then on the other side of the ball, I'm going to go with the rookie, Gregory Rousseau. Now, Greg, I'm going to say this, and I rarely say this. I was wrong about something, maybe. All right, so mark it down. That was wrong. I chuckle because I was one of the people, maybe you or I know a lot of people were. I was in the boat of, hey, Greg Rousseau might be really good someday, but he's going to take a while. He's raw. He's going to take a while. I don't think so. I think Greg Rousseau is going to play, and I think Greg Rousseau might have more of an impact in year one than people give credit, at least from what I've seen, mostly without pads so far.
Yeah, obviously still more to come, but I know I was commenting on some of the reps that you're just seeing the one session, but his ability to use that length, to pivot back off, to use his hands, how quick his feet were for as big as he is, it's a very welcome surprise, because I think, it's so easy on draft night. You have super young, sat out for a whole year, only really one true year of production, was actually new to the defensive end position, and then you compound that where the next pick is a guy who's 2.5, almost 3 years older than him, tons of production, a more full repertoire. Everyone, it doesn't take a rocket scientist or someone who's super into the X's and O's to say, oh, well, we got a guy who's more pro ready and another guy who's going to take a little while to go, and that just became the drumbeat of, hey, Basham's going to be pro ready, and we'll get Rousseau down the line. It was unbelievable to be there. How often, like I'm just trying to watch in taking the full play as they're doing 11 on 11, and how often someone flashes and I look and like, oh, it's Rousseau again. Oh, it's Rousseau again. Like over and over. It was very noticeable. It was certainly a pleasant surprise for someone that I wasn't expecting it.
Yeah, I think you make a good point about how well he already uses his length. That a lot of times guys don't understand that because they're so physically dominant in college. They don't have to necessarily understand how to do those things. But once you get to the NFL, everybody's great, right? These are the best in the world. You're going against guys on the other side of the ball, these tackles, and these guards, and the offensive linemen who, they've been doing it, and they know how to make sure that, anything that you don't do really well, they're going to use against you. He's been able to come in and transition like that. I give the Bills coaching staff a lot of credit. They had OTAs this year. They had a rookie minicamp. They had minicamp. There's some time for them to do that. The other guy who's done this, I think AJ Epenesa. Now look, Epenesa isn't Rousseau. He's not the incredible physical specimen. But what I really like about him is he's a tactician. He doesn't use his length athletically like Rousseau does, but I think he really understands leverage, how to lock out, how to use his hands. And when he does that, I think those two guys, it looks like they're the future of the Buffalo Bills defensive end position, but we'll see. There's a lot of time here left, and I think preseason is going to tell us a lot.
One more name that I've heard thrown around a little bit was F.A. Obada, and that he was someone noticeable. Is he someone you've seen some flashes from?
Yeah, and I want to not go overboard on F.A. because I've actually been on the F.A. train a long time. As soon as they signed him, I really liked him. I've been hyping him up and talking about him, so I don't want to seem biased like, hey, look at the guy I told everybody about, right? But it is true. One of the reasons I really liked him was he checks all the boxes that the Bills want and the Bills really like. They love these traits, as you know. They love these long, athletic guys, and they believe in their development. They believe in their coaching staff. And then he comes over to the same defensive line coach he had, basically, in Eric Washington in Carolina. And this is a guy that's raw, but he's coachable. I think he really wants to be good. He hasn't played this game for a long time, but his length is showing up. I'm going to give you a great example of how his length impacts a play that people don't notice. So I'm watching the other day and yesterday. So he gets around the edge on the arc, and he wasn't going to have a sack. The tackle did a nice job to keep him away, but his length was so good and he used it so well. He reached over the shoulder and he almost got Josh to the point where Josh had to step up in the pocket and just throw a shuffle pass. Now, if that doesn't happen, Josh Allen probably gets a clean pass off down the field, right? But because of his length and understanding, he makes Josh step up, throw the shovel pass. That goes unnoticed in a box score.
Yeah.
But it's a real big play.
Well, and what better for Gregory Rousseau to learn from than to see that kind of thing, to leverage that length and to use it. And one of the comps that I liked when Efe Obada was signed was he's what they wanted Quentin Jefferson to be last year, but then couldn't really use him in that hybrid, movable chess piece role. And hopefully, if it continues with hearing how he sounded, it certainly sounds like he's going to make it hard not to be a name to be seen on the roster when the cutdowns come.
Yeah, I really like Efe, and he's very versatile, and then that's the one thing about this defensive line. What I'm super interested in, obviously, I can't say where guys are playing or not playing right now. All I can tell you is they do move guys around a lot, and they'll tell you that. And I'm really interested in what we see in the preseason about where guys line up, because they really like those versatile guys. That's going to impact how many numbers they keep and where they keep them. So, yeah. And the other thing about Efe is, think about it, Greg. I mean, he played 39% of the defensive snaps last year at Carolina. He still had 5.5 sacks. I mean, that's really productive.
No, it certainly shows you can make an impact when you're on the field. And you talked about the numbers. I had it planned a little bit later in the show, but Ron asking in the chat here, historically, we've seen some pretty steady structure from Beane and McDermott. And I've been very cautious with people saying, hey, I know that 4 seasons and 4 cutdown days seems like a lot. It's still a pretty small sample size. So we do know their preferences. We do know what they prefer to do, but the same thing, Brandon Beane had never traded down until he did. He had never traded a first-round pick for a player until he did. There are a lot of things that hadn't happened before. Some of the ones we've seen before with 6 wide receivers, 4 tight ends, 8 defensive linemen, the 9 offensive linemen. There's been a flex here or there. Do you think there's potential that some of the depth at certain positions could shift those historic numbers we've seen come cutdown day?
Going to be hard for them to carry more than 9 defensive linemen. And again, every time, obviously, if you go to my Twitter feed at Sal Sports, I always have the roster right there, right? And you can look at how I have it separated, obviously, is defensive ends, defensive tackles. That's how they're listed. But I think this year you have to be cautious. These guys are so interchangeable, a lot of them, that I think you just have to look at them as one group. And traditionally, they'll keep 9 at most. I don't think they've ever kept 10 defensive linemen.
I don't think so. Maybe a game, but
right.
never in any longer stretch.
Correct. 8 or 9 is what they keep on the final roster. And usually the 9th is because they want an extra guy for special teams and things like that. So if you're looking at 9, maybe they keep 10 if they think. But I think that's hard. You have to really have a guy that's got to show that he can play. And that position doesn't produce a lot of great special teams players, right? I mean, Daryl Johnson's kind of an exception.
Pretty rare.
At that position. It's generally your linebackers, your defensive backs, your running backs. They're going to give those extra special teams spots. So I don't think so. What I do think could happen this year, and I'm not predicting who it could be, I think they're deep enough that maybe Brandon Beane just spins one of these guys for a draft pick or something as they get, like he did Reggie Ragland, early on when he come in, something like that. Because I just don't know. I don't see the numbers and how they're going to shake out. It's going to be really interesting. So, yeah, I think you're probably still looking at 9 defensive linemen at most. However that is, tackles and ends, I'm really not sure.
Yeah, and I think the way you described it is really smart, that don't be locked into the traditional description there, that with so many guys like Obada, like Rousseau, like Addison, that have the ability to kick inside and can play both snaps, that could it on paper look like 6 defensive ends and 3 defensive tackles, but really you're still covering the percentage of snaps you need from the 4 defensive line spots. It's maybe not likely, but that's in play, that someone like Obada could be competing with Vernon Butler or Harrison Phillips as much as he's competing with one of the defensive ends.
Yeah, it's really weird. It's kind of like, I think a lot of defense, even offense these days, we're kind of going to positionless football around on both sides of the ball, aren't we? I mean, you talk about these tight ends who can do everything, receiver, tight end. You talk about these running backs who can do everything. It's really hard. I mean, that's why you have guys now, defensive ends and linebackers. That's why you have guys that are, filing grievances about where they're getting franchise tagged, at what position they're in. we think about safeties and how that has really transformed. Look at the Bills safeties. There's no Morris Strong in a free safety. That happened when we were younger, right? I mean, that's how you came up and you thought about it. I think really the Bills are kind of really ahead of the curve here, where we really getting into now, I should say, positionless football, especially on the defensive side, which is kind of what the Bills are.
Yeah, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but you look at, if you just watch the film and don't take a label, and you watch what Deion Jones does and what Jamal Adams does and what Brian Poole does and what Tyrann Mathieu, technically that's a linebacker and a strong safety and a nickel and a free safety-ish player. They're the same thing. They're just a movable chess piece on the defense going wherever, but they'll get labeled a different thing by that team, but they're moving all over the place. It's going to see more and more of that. That's interesting. Getting now into some of the question areas, obviously some of the easy ones that I'm sure you get thrown at you a lot. When the defensive line looks good, does that mean the offensive line has struggled? Does that mean that there's some questions there? And my biggest takeaway was, I've learned I do not want Josh Allen to take one snap that doesn't involve Deion Dawkins being on the field.
Yeah, I think they're still trying to figure out what to do with Deion out as far as who should take that particular spot. I think the preseason is going to tell us a little bit, show us a little bit, but I think whoever it is now might be a lot different than whoever the swing tackle or backup tackle might be, come September 12th when they take on the Pittsburgh Steelers. I would say, it's not like the offensive line, they haven't been horrible. There are some areas where you're like, ooh, they could have had Deion on that play, like you said, but it's not like they're giving up sacks left and right. I will tell you that. They're not doing that at practice every day. But I do think, this is a group that is being challenged right now because 5 different offensive linemen have missed time during camp. They signed another one today because I think they just need more numbers. Think about it. Yeah. Deion Dawkins and Ike Butker have been on the reserve COVID-19 list. Neither has practiced yet. Forrest Lamp missed practice on Monday. John Feliciano missed practice on Tuesday. Markwell Harrell got hurt in practice on Tuesday. So this is 5 offensive linemen, and as you know, they like their position flexibility. So what's a blessing is great because you can move guys around, but it's also, hey, we got to move these guys around. So who do we put here now, right? I mean, if you're going to start moving guys around, then you're coming up deficient maybe at another area. So I agree with you. I don't think the offensive line has looked bad in practice from what I've seen.
That's good.
I do think it's been challenging because they don't have Dawkins and Butker out there to be able to mask some of the things that, are going on when the things break down.
And I have to imagine for any position on the field, the one that gets the most comfortable and more into their normalcy with pads coming on is the offensive line. So certainly to be taken with a grain of salt that's going to be a big piece of that, but still it's a common question. Every time you hear, oh my gosh, the offense had a great day, Josh went 17 of 18, the immediate question is, oh, is there a problem with the defense? And if you hear sacks are happening, like, oh, what's wrong with the offensive line? One of the assumed spots that I think people had high hopes for that I've heard mixed reviews on so far has been Dane Jackson. Is he someone, one, what was your expectation coming in, and then 2, has he met that expectation or been a little surprised?
So I really like Dane. I liked him a lot last year, like everybody, right? I mean, he showed up, he just played really well in the chances he was given in game action, and even Leslie Frazier has kind of alluded to, hey, that's our one spot that, guys are going to be fighting for. But if you want to take the job, you have to take the job. And I don't think Dane Jackson's taken the job away from Levi Wallace from what I've seen. He's been a little too inconsistent for what I want right now. I mean, if you're going to be the number 2 starting cornerback in the NFL on a Super Bowl aspiration team, you have to show me that you're going to go out there and make play after play and deserve that role. Now, I'm not telling you Levi Wallace has been perfect, but I think he's been more consistent at practice than Dane Jackson's been, and he's already the incumbent. I mean, Levi Wallace has played 35 NFL games. You know how many he started? 35. He's never come off the bench. He's been a starter ever since he earned the starting role midway through his rookie season. I like Dane Jackson. This is not an indictment, but I will say this. I think Dane Jackson could be one of those, game player guys. He shows up in games and all of a sudden, wow, who's this guy? I want to see what he does. He's got to do it in Detroit. He's got to do it in Chicago. He's got to do it against the Green Bay Packers at home. By then, though, is it too late, right? Because I think Dane Jackson is a good player they're going to rely on, but right now he hasn't shown me that he's earned that starting role over Levi Wallace.
No, and I think you described it perfectly, that you can't expect it's obviously Levi had a lot of people throwing questions out there. When you're the number 2 cornerback, opposite a lockdown corner like Trey White, you're going to get targeted more often. When you're in a defense that is based on not giving up the big play but rallying and tackling, sometimes you're going to give up catches on those targets. And some people take those numbers out of context and say, oh, look, he's getting roasted or giving up things. His more insightful numbers, you look at like the passing rating against and the percentage of snaps that he's giving things up, it's actually pretty solid. Like he's not doing a poor job. So then you mix in some flashes from Dane Jackson later on. It almost became this assumption that it was Dane Jackson's job to lose. So I think kind of bringing in some context that, hey, this is a guy that started 35 games and that is going to need his job taken from him, right, not just some coin flip. That's some great perspective to share in that position.
And, it doesn't mean that Dane Jackson can't be a very, very useful, worthy player for them. And it also doesn't mean he can't take the starting job away from him later. Remember what happened at Levi the last couple of years? They started platooning with him, with Josh Norman or with Kevin Johnson before, right? I mean, that's what they've done. Maybe that's the case. So I just want to see a little more consistency from Dane. That could happen as we get going here with the pads on. He's a physical player too. So, I think that will help him now that the pads are on and we can see what he can do.
One other player in that secondary that I've heard some positive things about, you've heard some of the other people in the secondary talk about. You had some questions here in the chat from James, how Saran Neal was looking. I know I saw a couple of reps where we were watching some of the one-on-one drills and watching him shadow Isaiah McKenzie down the field. And I was like, oh, that's pretty nice coverage. I was surprised with the athleticism for how thick he looks. Have you noticed Saran out there kind of stepping maybe more into defense than just that special teams maven?
Yeah, I have. But, I think this goes back a year or so. I think Saran has shown that he's a very capable and worthy backup player on the defensive side. He's not a starter, and he hasn't been a starter, I should say. I don't expect that, but, we'll see where things go. But he's a very valuable backup piece. Think about this kid. He's played safety. He's played outside corner. He's played slot corner in nickel situations. So I think people talk a lot about the big nickel, the big safety for the Bills to have. He could be that role. He's a guy that I think he can play multiple positions. I'm not sure he has one true position on a football field that fits. But again, positionless football is kind of what the Bills are going to. They can kind of rely on him to do a lot of things. I do like what I've seen from Saran Neal. You know what I like? The guy, he's got an attitude about him. I think he knows. First of all, he's in a contract here, right? I mean, Saran Neal, he's after this year, he's trying to make a living in this league and trying to get a second contract. So I think that's also motivation for him. But I really like what I see from him because every time he's out there, it seems like he's around the football and he's got a bit of an attitude and an edge to him. And I think that this defense needs that sometimes.
And I think the question is obviously I don't think he's pushing Taron Johnson for a job. He's obviously not pushing Mike or Jordan Poyer for a job. If you look back at last year, Dean Marlowe played almost 250 snaps that he was that easy fill-in spot. And you almost took for granted that I used to joke and call him the roster cockroach. Like you could just never get rid of him. Like he just kept sticking and kept finding a way. And people would do their 53-man projections and always find a way to cut Dean Marlowe. And he kept making the team. And then all of a sudden he signs, I think, in Detroit. And it's like, oh, well, I kind of liked having Dean Marlowe around. And now all of a sudden I'm curious, like is that the spot Saran Neal could go for? Can Jaquan Johnson? Some people immediately penciled Damar Hamlin in. He's wearing 31. That's maybe a spot you could see Saran step into.
Well, without trying to reveal too much, obviously I don't want to do that or get in trouble. I will say that the third safety spot to me is super intriguing. I think this could really go any way. I really think the games are going to be what we're going to decide this year. Now, remember, Jaquan Johnson has been on this team. This is his third year, but really he's only played special teams. Yeah. That's all he's done, And you're right. I think Dean Marlowe was the perfect number 3 safety for this team, a guy that knows his role, knows exactly what he has to do, can play for either safety, but he doesn't have to play a lot because Micah and Jordan never come off the field. Well, hopefully that's the case, right? Yeah. I think they really like what they saw from Josh Thomas last year on the practice squad. The practice squad's getting expanded last year really gave them a good look at a lot of these guys. And then we know, Tariq Thompson is a guy that's going to be really physical with you. He came in as an undrafted free agent. I think Damar Hamlin has an excellent shot here because Damar Hamlin is a special teams player as well. And as we know, usually that third safety, anybody at safety, they're going to keep for depth purposes. It's got to be a really good special teams player. I think the games are going to what's going to decide this. Probably not practice, but what they do in games through the preseason.
And I know one other topic that came up in the chat here. On Saturday, we didn't see any actual kicking. We saw a lot of special teams drills. We saw a lot of receiving of kicks from the jugs, and you saw them flip the jugs machine, whether it was a kick return or a punt return. So we'll go both sides of the special teams here. First, from a kicking standpoint, how has the new punter looked? And I've heard Tyler Bass has not stepped back from where he was last year.
I don't think I've seen Tyler Bass miss a kick.
Oh, that's awesome.
I don't think so. I actually texted 2 other media members the other night. Maybe it was last week after like a bunch of practices. I did my like one observation from each position I wrote about at our website, WGR550.com. But what I did was I texted 2 media members and I said, okay, have you guys seen Tyler Bass miss a kick? Because I have not seen it and I want to make sure that I'm right here. And they're like, no, actually, come to think of it, we haven't seen him miss a kick.
That's awesome.
It's funny because we're not tracking it because there's no kicking competition. Normally you track it because it's him against Hauschka and who's making it, who's missing, right? But,
or at least a camp leg. It's crazy that no snapper, no punter, no kicker, like they're rock solid.
That might also be COVID related. You know, the more, hey, we don't need a guy, we got our guys. So, you know, why bring extra people in that, you know, you never know, and percentages and numbers and on protocols and things like that. You know, it's hard to judge Matt Hawk right now. You know, they're in these types of situations, they're not always going live, especially without pads on. You don't want to hit the punter and stuff like that. I will say, though, you know, they signed Matt Hawk to be more of a directional kicker. They signed him to be more of a placement kicker than Corey Bojorquez. People always ask me, why did the Bills let Corey Bojorquez go? And the answer is basically because he had such a strong leg. And my answer is, it's great to have a strong leg. But when you're punting generally not from inside your own territory because your offense is good enough to get it to at least to midfield, you don't need a strong leg. What you need is placement, and you need hang time and things like that. And I think that's why they got Matt Hawk. So, you know, we'll see what he can do once the preseason games start. But that's why they signed him.
So flipping to the other side of that coin, when the ball that they're kicking is coming down, I was struck watching the guys on Saturday how confident and smooth Isaiah McKenzie looked, and that not that there was a huge difference, but both Brandon Powell and Marquez Stevenson, when they're catching it, there's that focus on making sure you kind of lock the ball in, and there's almost like a split-second hesitation of, okay, yep, I got the ball, and then going. And Isaiah McKenzie was just smooth and confident and looked kind of like Andre Roberts looked when he was catching the ball. Has that been consistent across other practices? Obviously, we've heard lots of stuff about his gadget role being tough to cover, his quickness translating there, but I've been nervous about those early career muffs, fumbles, drops, hands issues, and that, you know, just like Josh Allen, can you learn to be accurate? Can you learn to be secure with the football? What have you seen from McKenzie in that role versus what many people saw as a wide open competition at returner?
Yeah, I mean, I think Isaiah's done a really good job in both facets from what I've seen. I think he's done a really good job in how you describe it. I think he's done a good job as a wide receiver in training camp as well. And it's hard for me to see. We talked about Kumaro to start this. Yeah. It's hard for me to see either of these guys not on the team, to be quite honest with you. I think that you're looking at your number 5 and 6 guys, but who knows? Are they going to keep 5? They going to keep 6? They going to keep 7? I mean, I really don't know, but I think you're probably looking at that because I think Isaiah has proven his worth. And if not for nothing, I mean, he can be a really dynamic return man. We saw that in the Miami game last year in the finale when he took that one to the house, right? Yeah. But, you know, this goes back to the offseason. Brandon Beane told us in a Zoom call that Isaiah, he said he really wants the job. He wants both jobs, and he's working hard in Florida. And he was down in Florida all the time, every day, working on this, working on punt returns and kick returns. And he even was doing it with it might have been Matt Hawk. I think it was him, but he made it a point to say with a left-footed punter. He's been working with a left-footed punter to make sure that when he gets to camp, he's going to see a left-footed punter and he's going to know the rotation and all those kinds of things. And you know, he really is dialed in right now and making sure that he can become the best return man he can be.
That's really encouraging. And obviously you hope that the last 2 years also he spent every day with an elite returner who had that confidence, that decision making, the ability to do those aggressive, you know, fielding of punts, never letting it drop and lose the kind of lost yardage that people don't see. I was always a huge advocate for Andre Roberts and the ways that he protected little chunks of yards all the time, just getting the extra 5 or 6 yards, not letting it bounce and losing those 7 yards you can get when it bounces back. And you hope that combination of his work ethic and shadowing underneath Roberts allows him to kind of translate in that mode.
Yeah, and it's not like he's never done it, right? I mean, Isaiah
Yeah.
done it. He's been a return man. I think it's really about reps. That's what it's about, and that's what we're talking about here. You mentioned it, the smoothness and getting the reps. And I said going back to Florida and working out. I think really that's what he needs. He needs reps, and with reps will come confidence, and then with the confidence comes the ability to make plays.
Excellent. And as we get there talking about getting into pads, what are some of the things you're looking forward to as we now shift into more physical practices? And tomorrow night is a football game, so it's not a Bills game, but there's a football game on my television tomorrow night. And next week we have our first preseason game. What are some of the key things you're looking for as we get into that mode?
So on the first day of pads was 2 days ago. It was yesterday. I'm sorry, on Tuesday, and it was super interesting. It was kind of funny. The DBs were a lot more handsy. They were getting their hands up and they were grabbing. And I made a comment to our buddy Matt Perino. I said, if officials were out here, there'd be some flags thrown right now. Like it seemed to me like they were like, hey, we can get after these guys now. Let's get after them. And they didn't care. There was some holding. There was one play. I don't remember. I promise I can't remember who the actual DB was. Might have been Dane Jackson, actually. I mean, he mugged Stephon Diggs. And Diggs, he just did this little under move where he kind of just shook him off, super, super smooth, and just came up and made the catch. And
of course he did.
Oh my God,
of course he did.
Insane. But he was getting mugged. But it wasn't just Dane. Whoever it was, guys were grabbing each other. So to the point I'm making is, starting tomorrow, I believe officials will be at practice.
Okay.
The rest of this week, tomorrow, Friday, and Saturday at the stadium. If anybody's going, you're going to see officials there as well through the end of the week. That's one of the things I'm wondering on. When the officials are there, are the DBs going to be able to do that? Are they going to be able to hold back on these receivers? They want to get physical a little bit more now that pads are coming on. Those are the kinds of things that I'm looking for. The other thing is, it's hard to tell the run game when there's no pads on. When there is pads, they're not taking them to the ground. It's called upside. You just go up and you wrap them up basically, and you bang them a little bit. So at least you can get a little more of a feel for the run game. And I think that's one thing that I've kind of been missing here is, how do they look in the run game, both on run offense and run defense? Because there just hasn't been pads to be able to really see what that looks like.
And that kind of struck another question in my mind. What have you seen from Matt Breida? I know the speed is certainly noticeable when you see him try to get out there to the edge. Is that a guy that you think is going to need to show it through pads and through that physicality to make sure it translates?
No, I think they know his role, and I think they know what he brings and what he brings. So two different people. First, Zach Moss on Saturday after practice, and then was it Devin Singletary? No, who was it? I know who it was. It was Brian Daboll. Both Zach Moss and Brian Daboll answered the exact same when asked the exact same question. The question was, what does Matt Breida bring to the room? And both said, speed. That's what they said. That was their answer. One word answer. I've seen that speed. It's really good. He can get to the edge. He gets to the outside. But what I really like is he's more shifty than people realize. He's a one cut guy that just goes, and once he gets that one cut in, boom, he's off to the races. If he can get to the second level, now look out. And I think that's really what they plan on to having him, is be that guy. So I don't think he has to necessarily prove anything with pads on or anything physicality. I think it's, hey, just use your speed, get through the hole, explode through the hole, get to the outside, be used in the passing game, matchups. Matt Breida to me is going to be the ultimate guy where Brian Daboll's really going to try and find mismatches every single week, whether that's one play, 10 plays, whatever it is. I think Brian Daboll's going to really specifically try to use Matt Breida in specific matchups.
We don't want to take up too much of your time here, so we'll get you out of here after just another question or two. That idea of Matt Breida, I'm curious, that brings into play last year. They never really had a game with I won't count Tywan Jones, but as the third true running back active on game day. Some people have talked about maybe 7 wide receivers. Both of those positions, in my mind, the logical leverage point is that tight end room. And I know we've seen, obviously Jacob Hollister's had to sit out. There's some, Quentin Morris and Reggie Gilliam are both kind of in a similar mold. And then you have Tommy Sweeney returning. Sounds like a decent camp from Dawson Knox. What have you thought about the tight end room? And is that a place where historically that's been a 4-position spot on the roster? Is that potentially 3 to keep an extra receiver, to keep an extra defensive lineman, some other odd position? How is that shaken out here in the way that they've approached it?
Well, first of all, I want to say I think they like their tight end group more than fans seem to like it. All this stuff about Zach Ertz and everything like that. I mean, who knows? They could trade for the guy or somebody else tonight while we're on the show for all I know, but I think that they are really confident in who they have. I think they really like Dawson Knox. They think he's going to make a year 3 jump. Even Leslie Frazier said, I think Dawson Knox is going to have a big year. Now, that's something important. The defensive coordinator says that, right? Because he's the one that's watching him in practice and going against him and things like that. They signed Jacob Hollister. Obviously, he hasn't practiced lately, but I think they have plans for him to be there. So to me, it's Knox and Hollister, and then what do you want to do after that? Tommy Sweeney has great hands. He just catches everything. He just doesn't do anything else that's really special, right? He's not a matchup. If the Bills had to go into a game or 5 or 6 games with Tommy Sweeney as your number 2, I think I'm okay with that. I think I'm okay with him being on the roster even for a full season. He's just not a number 1 type of tight end. He's not a guy you're going to rely on for a whole bunch of snaps or anything like that. I like Nate Becker as well. The guy I'm super interested in, though, is Reggie Gilliam. He's listed as a fullback on the roster, but again, kind of a Swiss Army knife here, right? So that might kind of have play into how you do what you just said, which is how you want to massage those numbers a little bit.
Yeah.
It's hard for me not to see them dressing 4 running backs because I really think they want to use Moss and Singletary and Matt Breida. And how do you not dress Tywan Jones? He's here for a specific reason. So you can't count Tywan as a running back. You just have to kind of put him in his own bucket. He's a special teams guy. But even that said, they only had 2 running backs and that special teams guy last year. And I don't know. This is at the end of the day, Greg, there's going to be some really tough decisions on this roster and on game days.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way for us to wrap here is that, as we get into these preseason games, we see the practices coming here. Obviously, every year, Brandon Beane has found a guy to trade before cutdown day, so obviously it would be naive to assume that every single one of these guys are going to make it here. So there's those depth spots where we have more talent than what makes sense. He's going to leverage that. And all I know is that cutdown day now becomes this weird experience on social media because there's now so many good players that people are favorites of that all of a sudden it becomes a difficult position. And that, I don't know who this year's Delshon Phillips is going to be that nobody really saw coming. But, man, there's a lot of talent on this roster, and that means some good players are not going to make the team.
That's right. I have a dark horse candidate for who could be this year's Delshon Phillips.
Okay.
Andre Smith.
Ooh.
Andre Smith. I love the linebacker room. I think the linebackers are really good. I think they like Andre Smith more than maybe people realize. He's they traded an asset for him. They traded for him, right? And I mean, they didn't have to give up the asset ultimately.
They ended up kind of sneaking him.
He was released, so they didn't have to give it up. Conditional pick. Then they re-signed him.
Yeah.
So it was kind of playing a game, but that could be a sneaky play. I just want people to maybe keep an eye on him as we go through preseason. I think that's a guy they might like a little more than people realize, and can do some things. So you're right. It's going to be super interesting to see how all of that shakes out. And as far as trading, the one area though, the one thing that holds me back, and I agree with you. I mean, if they find somebody, we're not going to use this guy, let's trade him. But remember, they have 16-man practice squad, right? They can keep guys, and they want to do it. And this is not your Buffalo Bills of old, everyone. This is not a team that, hey, we're not going to use a guy, let's trade him for a future asset. They want to be 2 deep, 3 deep, 4 deep, all deep on the practice squad because they want everyone possible in the organization to be able to play and not cost them a game that could cost them the home field or division and ultimately a Super Bowl. That's where they are right now. That's why when people bring up, oh, would you trade Trubisky to the Colts? Look, the Bills signed Mitch Trubisky because they're trying to win a Super Bowl, and they don't want to be in a situation where they have a 3-4 game stretch and they didn't have a good enough backup quarterback and suddenly they lose the number 1 seed, right? Yeah. So Mitch Trubisky has way more valuable to this team this year than he would in almost any other year.
Well, or in a vacuum to another team that's just kind of grasping at straws, whereas, no, could be the difference where, everybody saw you couldn't run half the playbook when Matt Barkley came in of what's 100%. There.
Yeah, and Mitch Trubisky, he's not Josh Allen, but he's athletic. He's mobile. He can move. And if Brian Daboll has to use him, he doesn't have to change much of the offense, and that's a great point, too.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Obviously, everybody sees, you're regular on all the different spots on WGR. They see you on Twitter. They see the South Sports and stuff, when you have time to be able to put the pods out. You're doing the training camp, inside show as well. What can people look forward to with the coverage coming up? You mentioned the blue and red scrimmage on Saturday. What other things can people see from you?
Well, I think, the biggest thing now is, starting next week, we're back on the air. We're doing broadcasts, and happy to say we're going to be at all these games, road games as well. And I'm really happy to say that this year we weren't able to travel on the road last year. We're able to do that this year. Everybody asks, you guys going on the road? Yes, I am. It's going to be awesome. I'm so glad to be able to go to these NFL stadiums again. I'll be back on the sidelines in my normal role on the Bills Radio Network. Eric Wood is back on the broadcast as our color man with John Murphy doing play-by-play. I got to give a great shout out to Steve Tasker, though. He was amazing filling in for Eric last year in the role that he had. And he's still obviously part of everything, WGR and the Bills and One Bills Live and all of that. But Eric will be sliding back into that role. John will be back on play-by-play. I'll be down on the sidelines. And that's really the next thing. People can find my coverage at WGR550.com, at Sal Sports. I'll be writing things, all that kind of stuff. And, as the season goes on, we'll get into the pod a little bit more. It's challenging right now with all the different elements going on. But when I can get a pod out, I'll do that. And that's on iTunes and Spotify, Sal Sports and stuff. But, Greg, I'm just really looking forward to getting back and doing games and, not having to do it in the same capacity we did last year, basically.
Yeah, can't wait to see you down on the sideline. Love all your coverage and appreciate all your time tonight. You're very generous with your time. We appreciate it. And we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. All right, guys, going to just wrap up a couple things here with some of our sponsors to be able to go through. Really appreciate the time someone like Sal to be able to come in and talk with us and go through all the stuff that he's seeing. Obviously, we see a lot of what is on the sidelines and the reports, and we're parsing together, what did Perino say and what did Talbot say and what are we hearing from Joe Biscaglia and what are we hearing from Matthew Fairburn. So I was really excited to be able to bring Sal on tonight and to be able to talk a little bit more about it. And I think the one player I wanted to go a little bit further on was Isaiah McKenzie, and he's a player that Sal touched on, that Aaron and I talked about it before, was the draft pick that we saw from Marquez Stevenson and the return of Isaiah Hodgins, and we signed Brandon Powell. Are those going to be the kind of positions that, man, we didn't see a lot of money coming, in the signing of Isaiah McKenzie? I think everything we've seen now has made him a virtual lock in what we're going to see on this roster. And I certainly, Aaron had predicted that he wasn't going to make the roster. I wasn't quite that far, but I was questioning it. And I was asking, are there spots where they're going to try to patch it together? And could it be somebody else returning punts? And if Stevenson returns punts, he was really good at kick returns. I got to tell you guys, when I was there on Saturday, it was a noticeable difference between what we were seeing with Brandon Powell, with Marcus Stevenson, and how Isaiah McKenzie looked. He looked just like Andre Roberts, right underneath the ball, all in one motion, catching it and going. There wasn't the kind of, basket and kind of embracing for impact and then waiting and then going. It was all at once, and you could tell he had really put that work in. He was talking and talking trash with some of the guys as he was going through there and doing it. And it doesn't mean that I'm not excited about Isaiah Hodgins and the potential that he has. It doesn't mean that I didn't notice Marcus Stevenson. His speed is there. It's that we have the opportunity and the luxury that we can afford to bring those guys along slowly, and that we're able to let them develop with maybe on the practice squad, needing to be able to sneak them there. I still think there's long-term potential, and that at the time of the draft, they didn't know what kind of work Isaiah McKenzie was going to put in during the offseason. They didn't know if he was going to come in and really show those sure hands and that confidence that when we had the defense get the other team off the field, we're not going to give it back, that we're not simply going to turn the ball back over to the other team because we muffed a punt because we didn't return it properly. So I think that having someone like Stevenson at the time was kind of an insurance policy, but Isaiah McKenzie has locked that up in my mind. And then the other one Sal touched on is Jake Kummerow. I got to tell you guys, this was not fan hype. This was not people just kind of bringing it up. The drumbeat that we heard from reporters during the week, Josh was going to him over and over and over again, and he was moving really well. I mean, he's 6'4". He's the biggest receiver that we have right there. He and Isaiah Hodgins are the two biggest guys, and he moves quickly. He moves his feet well. He looks like a receiver, and I think Sal described it really well. He's going to make this team as a receiver, not just as a guy that is a special teamer. And that, people talk about the value that a Daryl Johnson brought last year. He was just a special teamer. He was not a defensive end. And when he played defensive end, it was poorly. It was not good play. But he was such a good special teams player that he was active on game day and that he got some reps. And when somebody went down, he was the next defensive end to be able to go in and play. If you have the opposite and you have somebody like Jake Kummerow who is able to give you legit wide receiver snaps and can go in and be productive and get open and be able to make a contribution, even as a fifth or a sixth wide receiver, but is also getting game day snaps, playing in 4 phases of special teams, that all of a sudden opens up a spot somewhere else. I reported and showed some video of Matt Breida doing the same thing, and if they're able to get some snaps out of him on special teams, all of a sudden that makes it easier to justify having all 3 real running backs active on game day. That obviously Tywan Jones is there, and I agree with Sal. You don't really count him as a running back, just like Tyler Medikevich isn't really a linebacker. They're special teams players at the core. Having Matt Breida be able to contribute there in special teams is another way to get him active on game day. And there's going to be some tough decisions as it comes down to cuts, but that's going to happen as we watch these games going. So I'm going to be going back out on September 1st. I'm actually not going to be here on Saturday for the Blue-Red scrimmage, so really looking forward. I know a lot of you fans are going to be out there going to the scrimmage on Saturday down at the stadium. It's going to be a ton of fun. Go and check that out. Then we're going to have 3 weeks in a row of preseason games. We're going to have Detroit. We're going to have Chicago. I am going to be going to the home game with Green Bay to see the final preseason game. And then I'll be doing recaps on each of those as we come back and be able to share what we're seeing. Are some of these guys early, McKenzie, Epenesa, Obada, Gregory Rousseau, Kumaro, are they still continuing to flash? Have we gotten the line back in and starting to gel together? Are they able to make some combinations there? Those are the things that we're going to be looking at here. Do those same names continue to come up in the preseason games? Do we see them come through and show in the same way that we did in the practice reps? Are they showing that on the field? Can someone like Dane Jackson bring up? I love the way that Sal described that. Is he a gamer? Is he a guy that can really turn it on in the game to be able to go in and maybe some of these inconsistencies and grabbiness that we're seeing in practice, maybe he can flip that switch when game day comes. So those are the things we're going to watch for. Aaron and I are going to be here with you, but next week Aaron is out as well, so I'm going to have another special guest on next week. Joe Marino is going to be joining us from the Locked On Bills podcast, going to be talking about everything that he's seen from preseason as well. Looking forward to that. We're going to have a couple more guests coming on as the season comes aboard, but make sure you're checking things out. Our friends over at Uncle Jumbo's, we appreciate them very much. Our friends over at Underdog Fantasy, make sure you download the Underdog Fantasy app. If you use promo code COVER1 and make a minimum deposit of $10, you get $25 for free. The last couple days, I actually shared a $3 best ball draft that we're doing with a bunch of Bills Mafia and fans that are jumping on to have a good time with us. But really appreciate everything tonight. Tonight was a great show. Can't thank Sal enough for all of his time and the insight that he has being there every single day with the team. Appreciate everything that he provided. Awesome chat tonight. You guys had great questions and appreciate all the things you chipped in to be able to ask Sal while he was here. But on behalf of Sal Capaccio and everyone over here at Cover One, my name is Greg Thompson. You've been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.